Hello, hello, hello. Let's see if it's working. It is working. Okay. Let's pop out the live chat. Ultra low latency. Woo! Oh, is it going? It says end stream. That seems like I'm going live right now. I'm live. Hey, everybody. Anybody in the comments yet? Anybody here? Yeah, howdy. Okay, we're ready to go. We're rocking and rolling. Welcome to Mr. Jackson's Peanut Butter Hour. It is 3 o'clock. It is March 25th, Wednesday, March 25th. And my peanut butter for this peanut butter hour is actually Reese's Pieces egg. Because heck yes. Today we are going to be talking about mental health and we're going to be talking about environment. So I just want to give you guys a little bit of a heads up. If you're here early enough to hear this, this is, for all intents and purposes, a trigger warning as we talk about things about mental health. Yes, Blue. Miss Ely is just on a phone call right now. So if you give her a second, she'll be able to talk to you. We're going to be talking about mental health. We are going to be mentioning things about self-harm. And if any of that is going to be difficult for you, just keep that in mind. Because I want to give you guys a little bit of an understanding of how to affect your environment and how your environment affects you. And so in order to do that, we need to talk a little bit candidly about those things. So if you guys have questions that come up, feel free to put those in the comments so that I can go back and look at them and understand where you guys are coming from and try to address those questions. Before we get too into it, I strongly encourage you guys to find some peanut butter. It's 3 o'clock. You'll get listless. You'll get tired. Y'all need peanut butter in your life. It's bigger than a spoonful of peanut butter. And guys, it has Reese's Pieces inside. That's ridiculous. Blue, did you want to ask a question to Miss Ely?
Oh.
She's off the phone.
Sorry. Hi.
This allows me time to eat peanut butter. You should take art too, Jocelyn. You should take art too. That's the right answer to that question.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really honest. Photo is probably the easiest out of those classes. It'll be a lot of independent downtime or free time. And yeah, you'll be a little bit bored in it. Art too is really, really fun. I give you a lot of freedom, but I expect a lot from you. That could be really cool. Spanish 3. I'm scarred from my high school Spanish classes, so I don't ever recommend those, but they're actually probably pretty great. Oh, apparently someone is telling you don't take it.
I am not going to do the Joey's World Tour with peanut butter. That would horrify everybody.
I don't know what that is. Okay.
It's a guy who, without hands, eats an entire jar of
yeah.
yeah, okay, cool.
I've watched it. Okay.
Hey guys, I'm not just eating candy. I'm also having some healthy kombucha.
Okay, stuff with making clothes. Okay, her name is, okay.
Thanks, Kenna, for the amazing advice.
Okay, I'll check her out. That sounds great.
Jocelyn, just because it is your first language doesn't mean that the class itself is going to be easy.
Yeah.
My first language is English, and many times English was a very difficult class just because the amount of work that went into it.
Mm-hmm. And the difference between
like dimming.
Academic Spanish and I think maybe Spanish people actually speak, and we all know the difference, is that it's not really, yeah. Anyway.
Right.
Yeah,
Good,
art too.
Jocelyn.
Yeah, I'm super
How
excited
are you
about
getting
that.
a hold of your counselor? Are you
Yeah.
talking to them right now?
I sent an email, but I haven't gotten a response.
Blue, this is the longest question, but I've never heard of this YouTuber.
I'm gonna watch her stuff and see, and then maybe we can do something based off of what she does. Maybe we can recreate one of her videos.
Is that Blue should do it, and then Blue should teach me as part of the series that we're starting tomorrow.
Mr. Jackson Learns?
Mr. Jackson Learns. So I'm starting 2 different series. On Wednesdays, we're doing Mr. Jackson Makes Friends, which is where I try to reach out to 5 friends, and it's all part of a assignment, which don't even get me started about assignment talks. Katie knows why I'm upset about that. Check out the Discord if you have any questions. It's not an assignment, but it's a thing that could get you guys healthy and interested in other stuff. So That's great. I'm so glad. I wish that they had told me that they were reaching out to you guys so I could share that information with you.
Yeah.
So this is new. I'll make sure that everybody knows that counselors are reaching out. That's great.
Ooh, yay. Yay, Blue. I'm super excited. I'll do that.
So yeah, Blue, you learn, you teach me, and I have a sewing machine. So you'll have to step me through all of those different parts to it, and it will be hilarious as I try not to curse.
I think that's great. So you're just getting schedules sent to you. That's great that they're working. I sent an
Magically.
email, but they're
Here's
probably
the
getting
schedule.
so many emails a day. I probably got buried. Yeah, art 2 would be really, really great. Yay. She emailed me. Did I answer every question? I feel like there's a lot of stuff.
Well, there's a lot of questions coming in, and we haven't even began our conversation about mental health.
No.
So, how will you go about teaching me? What we'll do is setting it up right now. What I've figured out is either through Google Meet or through Skype. I can incorporate all of that into OBS. So your voice will come through, you'll walk me through the steps, and we'll have a video camera following me as I try to do the steps. I don't want to bother my counselor either. My counselor is a mental health thing.
It's no bother. That's what they're there for. They're probably missing you guys too. As much as we're missing you guys, it's probably the same.
And I'm sorry about my webcam that doesn't seem to understand how to auto adjust. I'll have to figure out what the firmware is doing. But until then, deal with this awkward webcam that's built into the not iPad, whatever this is called, laptop. So, in talking about mental health. All right. Get. This is secret information. All right. In talking about mental health, one of the things that I want to bring up is actually a book that I was reading by Malcolm Gladwell. I have been mentioning that I've been reading Malcolm Gladwell's entire catalog of books in preparation for teaching about Outliers, because Outliers is his most popular. If you've never read Outliers, I strongly suggest that you do that. But this one is called Blink. And Blink is about basically trusting your instincts, trusting that gut feeling that tells you when something is wrong, right? In Blink, he goes off on somewhat of a tangent talking about environment and how oftentimes many things that we do are connected to the environment that we're in. He examines Sylvia Plath and he examines crime. And he says, basically, isn't it strange how we all know that there's a street or there's a neighborhood where crime is worse? We know that that neighborhood exists. We know when we're there that the neighborhood is crime-ridden. But what we've also learned is that if we start policing those areas that are crime-ridden, it's not like they just move to the next street over. That there's something strange about the way our environment actually allows for certain behaviors or encourages certain behaviors. People who go to certain colleges end up having very like-minded outlooks on life. People who hang out in the same friend group or who live near each other oftentimes have similar traits to each other. The fact that we're all, for the most part, here in the Coachella Valley changes the way that we see life and the way that our natural rhythms work. So we understand that environment has a big impact on identity, on the way that we behave. And so what police officers did was they started to police just specific areas, and they noticed that even just focusing on one block completely changed the crime in that area. If they were able to stop people more in that one block, it would affect things. Now, Malcolm Gladwell goes on to talk about how this basically ends up getting misinterpreted. This information turns into what we now know as stop and frisk, where basically they said, if we stop more people, then we're more likely to catch criminals. And it's not true. It's actually when we stop people in a very specific place, when we know that that place is where crime is coming from. What the issue was is that it wasn't about people. It was about that specific area being inducive to crime. And it's very strange because we oftentimes think of it as basically this person's a criminal, they broke the law, and they broke the law because they have whatever makeup is required to make them one of those people who breaks the law, right? Bad law-breaking people break laws. That's why bad law-breaking people must go to jail. But in reality, there's something going on underneath that says, actually being in specific places at specific times encourages specific behavior. And it's not necessarily that those people will break the law, it's that that context encourages law breaking. Yeah, what ended up happening with the vandalism with the school, you can kind of understand. I will touch on that in just a second. So I'm setting up this idea that essentially your environment has a bigger impact on your understanding of life than you realize. So when we talk about mental health and we say, maybe I'm just sick, maybe I'm crazy, maybe I'm the problem here and I need to seek help. There's an aspect of that where, yes, you should always seek help from people who are professionals, but it also ties in, and professionals will say this as well, with environment. You, in this context, might be more prone to vandalism, but you in another context, not as prone to vandalism, right? It's not so much that you are a bad person who makes mistakes, it's that you consistently are drawn to context where mistake making is possible. So Malcolm Gladwell goes in and starts interviewing people, not Malcolm Gladwell himself. He gets these interviews that they did with people who were living and working on those streets where crime was more popular. He actually ends up talking to a sex worker and asking them basically why they didn't end up just moving, right? Why not hop over here? If this place is dangerous, if this place is being overly policed, why not just go over to the next block and continue doing your job? And their answer was actually very telling. I've made friends here. I've made friends here. I feel comfortable here. And I don't belong with that tribe, basically. That other group of people who might also be breaking the law doesn't break the law in the same way that I like to break the law. So the environment that they were in led them to a place where they behaved in a way that encouraged certain negative behaviors. All right. Let's take a pause so I can read all this stuff. I'm bringing you guys a loaf of bread when we come back. Heck yes, Jocelyn, please do. Please spam with dabbing and or coughing into elbow. Can any place become crime-ridden if given the right circumstances? I would say places are context within themselves, but time is also a context. And so, yes, a street can become more inducive to crime based off of the context of time in which, right? So like, let's imagine that all of your friends end up staying in the valley. And for the most part, all of your friends live in the cove in the valley, right? They live in a very specific block in the cove. You're hanging out with each other and the economy goes, right? Everything falls apart. So that's why you end up going to basically crime as a way of making money. You and your friends are supporting each other and are buying from each other. Maybe there's drug dealing involved. Maybe there's sex work involved. All of that ends up becoming a place where that is encouraged or inclusive, and you feel more inclined to be a part of that group because that's your friend group. So then I go into what used to be your family street, and it was a completely normal street 10 years ago. Over the course of that decade, because you guys haven't left and you fostered this mentality, the environment has shifted. Imagine, for instance, this room as an environment. I've done what I can to turn it into a studio, but before we had this quarantine, this room was, I'm going to be honest, covered in cat pee, because the kitten that we had gotten was having trouble using the litter box, and this was the area in which she had decided was going to be her place, and it was difficult to train her otherwise. But once we cleaned up that area, this is now no longer her cat pee area. This is an area where a different context has taken place. So, people make mistakes and are under certain circumstances of need or ignorance and get punished out of proportion instead of being rehabilitated, like going to jail for substance abuse. I'm really against how the justice system treats those kind of crimes. They punish instead of giving the amount of help that they need. Blue, I believe that you are completely correct.
Preach.
I believe that you're completely correct in saying that. A very compelling thing that goes into more detail about how unjust this is. There's an episode of Dirty Money, which I've been watching on Netflix. And in that episode, they talk about HSBC Bank. HSBC Bank was giving money not giving money, was laundering money for the drug cartels in Mexico. And when we found out that this was taking place, they basically everyone kept their jobs. Nobody got in jail. All the people who were laundering billions of dollars for drug cartels got off scot-free. At the same time, that same year, 70,000 people were put in jail for first-time drug offenses. So, yeah, it's funny how that works. Our policing system, our jailing system is a for-profit program, and the way that we're doing it right now isn't rehabilitating. And we'll talk about that in a second. That's why money should be spent on rehab and not containment, which goes back all the way to the 1960s with the popularity, and before the early 1900s into the 1960s, of the popularity of a movie and book called One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which depicted what it was like in mental health facilities that were state-run, and that ultimately resulted in people closing down those mental health facilities, and those state-run mental health facilities got turned into nothing, and those people got pushed out onto the streets, and their behavior was deemed criminal, and now those people are in jail. So yes, rehab, not punishment. I would agree. Which is a powerful conversation. It's not exactly the conversation that I had gone into this with. I have a TO that is doing really well now, but before, he had been in and out of jail for drugs and drug-related crimes. Every time he would come out, and he would fall back in because he didn't get the complete professional or otherwise help that he needed. He was so fortunate to have family that helps him. Yes. Okay. So talking about that, I'll use that as a segue back into this idea of context, right? So let's stop thinking of it as the idea, it's one flew over the cuckoo's nest. Stop thinking of it as this idea of just criminality, right? So if I'm in a certain context, I'm going to be more likely to do criminal things. In the same way, there are certain contexts that might encourage us to do harmful behaviors to ourselves. We look at the character of Sylvia Plath. Sylvia Plath was a woman. She was a female author. She was an amazing writer. And she was known for kind of joking about and frequently talking about romanticizing suicide. And so she actually was partnered up with another writer who had the same sort of ideas of romanticizing this concept of suicide. And so we look at this story of Sylvia Plath, real person, and ultimately in the end, she ends up, and this is another trigger warning if anybody doesn't want to hear about this sort of stuff, we are talking about self-harm. She ends up putting her head in an oven. And at the time, the way that ovens were set up, the gas that was coming in through the oven was highly toxic. You could leave the oven open and you could simply inhale that gas and die. You could asphyxiate on that gas. A similar sort of method that people would talk about would be like parking a car in a garage and leaving the car running and asphyxiating from that type of gas. The reason why this really resonated with somebody like Sylvia Plath was because she was intrigued by the beauty of it, the wonder of it, and being able to die in a way that made her look like she had peacefully drifted off to sleep, being able to die in a way that wouldn't affect other people was exactly the sort of thing that she was looking for. Now, a year later, a year after that had happened, they changed the natural gas that was going into our ovens so that you can no longer do that. It's impossible. They've also since changed gas emissions from cars so that it is basically impossible to do that with a car. They've also talked about things like, should we put up nets under bridges? This is a suggestion about mental health that says, if taken out of a context, does the desire to hurt oneself go away? Now, the desire might still be there. The desire to hurt yourself might still be there, but the desire to hurt yourself is very much attached to a specific context. We've noticed that some people, for instance, men, are more likely to use guns in suicide attempts. They are less concerned about other people having to clean up their mess or being discovered in a way that is unattractive or not as romantic, and that there are people who would be more likely to use pills. However, when we look at something like the comparison between the death rate of people who use weapons like guns to hurt themselves versus people who use pills, the chances of surviving that attempt with pills is far, far, far higher. So the chances of survival is much higher. And so if we were to get rid of weapons inside of people's homes, we change a context wherein which it makes it easier for some people to commit suicide. If we put a net down by the Golden Gate Bridge, it changes the fact that people no longer want to jump off that bridge. They aren't just thinking of, I need this thing to end and I need it to end right now. They are still planning a little bit into the future. And so when thinking about that, you think about, am I putting myself in a context that encourages this type of behavior? Am I subtly, maybe even in the back of my head, moving the chess pieces to make this more accessible? And that is when things become concerning. For instance, a small behavior like, for me, I know when I'm about to go through a depressive episode because I start really liking certain types of music and being like, oh, that's right. I'm like nostalgic for when I used to feel that way. Oh, that sadness feels so rich to me and I want to feel that thing again. So now I've started to change my environment. The music that I'm inputting into my brain is affecting the way that I view my place in the world. Something as simple as that. I'm not going to say, hey, this song or listening to this type of music is going to make you sad. What I am going to say is that that type of music made me sad, and it's what I sought after when I knew that I was going through a depressive episode. So when we look at this, we're really saying, how does our environment affect me for the positive or the negative? Because many of you guys, especially in this coronavirus situation, you're stuck. You got no way out of the situation that you're in. And if that situation is challenging or difficult, what can we do about it? How can we change our environment to make it something that's more comfortable for me? Environment isn't just talking about the color of paint on your walls. It's not just talking about where the furniture is. Environment is also talking about, on a bigger scale, the people that you consistently hang around, the media that you consume, and the ways in which you schedule your day. All of that would be in changing your environment or changing your context. I'm going to take a moment in this transition to read through your comments and catch up. All right. So policing. There's a whole lot that we could do talking about policing. I'm glad Sammy chimed in with One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. It sucks because so much of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is literally about how able/mentally well people make bad decisions for disabled people from their position of power without actually caring for them. Absolutely. I think that the best comparison between One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and any other book is The Jungle. The Jungle was supposed to be about working conditions and how terrible working conditions was, and it got turned into a manifesto for vegetarianism because people were more concerned that there were fingers in their hot dogs than they were that people had lost fingers. And that is heartbreaking. So in the same way, what people said were like, oh, well, then we should shut down all these programs instead of we should probably help these people more. It's amazing how that works. It's like someone without depression saying, hey, just like, don't think about those things, right? And you'll hear that a lot. One book that I really love is It's Kind of a Funny Story, yes, which all got turned into a movie. It deals with a teenager who struggles with self-harm and is put into a place to rehabilitate him and show his relationships growing. And when we talk about that, we talk about the environment of going into an inpatient facility, right? And we'll talk about that in a second. I might move into that. I hate when people act like that. Oh, I had really bad anxiety yesterday. My friend told me to just stop overthinking. And I hate when people act like that. My dad doesn't understand anxiety or anxiety disorder and tells me it's all in your head. When, yeah, that's the whole point. That's
it's
why
all
it isn't good.
It's
irrational. I don't know what is okay to say and what isn't okay to say because I don't want to trigger anybody. And I will say this needs to be a safe space, but I want to encourage open conversation. Mm-hmm. And I've got to move my laptop so that it's not shaking every time.
Right, and I'm also like trying to get in there. I think something that I do with most of my friends and with Mr. Jackson and some of you too. I ask if you guys have the emotional space, right? Just double checking, like, hey, can you hear me vent today or talk about these things? And if they say, yeah, go for it, then feel free. But, you know, some people might need that, right? And we go through waves of maybe needing it or maybe not needing it. And so, yeah, I definitely, when I talk to my adult friends or even my mom sometimes, I'm like, hey, how much emotional space do you have? Because I'm going to, right, make my decisions based off of your needs.
And if this is not something that you can handle right now, it is something that will stay up so long as YouTube allows it.
Exactly.
I just brought up suicide. I brought up suicide in multiple different ways. So, and we are talking about drug use and that sort of stuff. So, very sensitive. Cat just got into a bag. Using this moment so you guys can chat a little bit and I can introduce the next sort of thing. So, as we're talking about environment and how environment impacts you and whether or not you have control over that. Let's talk about inpatient facilities. The idea here is essentially if you're in a very dangerous context right now, we're going to remove you from that context and put you in a 72-hour hold. 3 days where you're no longer able to have access to that same context. They give you a strict Okay, cool. Okay, that's a good idea, Sammy. I'll try and make that work in a second. But they put you in a strict context where you're incapable of having access to things like medication or weapons or things that might hurt you in some way. And the whole idea is in removing you from your context, we've removed you from the immediate need that you might have to hurt yourself. And it allows you to press a big reset button. The issue is that we don't have anything that guarantees that you then leave that safe context and enter into a new context. A lot of what we have is basically just like, make sure it doesn't happen right now, and then let the person go when we think that the moment has passed. And it's been helpful. That is certainly one of the tools that we have right now that does work. It removes you from your immediate context, puts you into another context, and says, okay, big reset button. You'll notice on TikTok and you'll notice on other social medias, when you start talking about mental health, some people will romanticize those situations. They'll talk about, oh, wow, this inpatient facility where I met all these people and where I made like inpatient boyfriend or inpatient girlfriend. And some of that is explored and it's kind of a funny story. The idea of an inpatient relationship, context, all of that sort of stuff as you're trying to figure stuff out. And it sort of normalizes the idea of inpatient care. And I think that that's helpful, but I also think that we have to recognize that the contexts that we're in play a huge role in shaping the way that our brain responds to that context. So I would oftentimes, when I got really anxious, I would start moving around furniture. I would just like, I'd pick up a chair, move it to the other side of the room, and then I'd be like, well, if the chair's here, then I have to move this TV, if the TV's here. And that would make me more active, which would also help with my anxiety. But I would get in these situations where people would be like my roommates in college would be like, hey, Mr. Jackson, it's not the furniture. The furniture isn't going to fix this, right? So me putting the couch in another position doesn't necessarily fix the problem. Mm-hmm. The thing is, they were a little bit wrong. Not that they were wrong about like, yeah, I'm not going to cure my anxiety by moving the couch, but they were wrong that the environment didn't also shape the way that I was viewing my life. So if I'm in an environment where I know that I can hurt myself, and that's in the back of your head right now, I really want to encourage you to change your environment. Like immediately. Just knowing that, hey, I have access to this thing, that thing needs to go. And if you have a moment to do that now, I would strongly do that. Yeah, a moment of clarity where you say, no, this is a bad thing. I'm getting rid of this bad thing, at least for now. Especially when we're talking about the environment that you're in, where you are quarantined. And so your chances of getting to another context are very, very slim, right? That gives us the opportunity when we're at home to have a similar sort of setup that we would have in like 72-hour hold, where you're just like, I hate this. I'm feeling really bad. I don't like these people. I don't like this situation, but there's nothing I can do about it. That sense of there's nothing I can do about it is so much better than I know exactly what I'm going to do about this. I know where it is. I know how to get to it. I know what I'm going to write. All of that sort of stuff. We've got to change our context and remove those things that allow that to take place. The more context that we have that allows us those things, the more likelihood we are going to spend time thinking about it, right? If it's not there, right now even, I'm thinking of something as simple as I just bought these for this thing, and I'm like, I know exactly where that sweet candy is. I'm going to eat it. If it wasn't there, I wouldn't consider that a possibility, right? If I was like, everything is shut down, there's no way I can get more candy, I'm not going to go and get that thing. Right now, I can think of like churros at Disneyland. And if I think of churros at Disneyland, I'm not like, ooh, I'm going to get me one of those churros. I'm just like, I can't do that. What a life we live in now. No churros from Disneyland. Everything's falling apart, right? That's a much better thought than I'm going to get those churros. Whether, like, whatever it costs, I'm going to get that thing.
Right.
Let's wrestle with the things we can't have. So getting rid of the stuff that might be in your way. All right. Let's look at some of these. Oh, Missy.
No, I was going to say, I was reading some of the comments and I was going to say something about some of them. Oh, and there was some good trigger warning happening like in the stream while we were talking. They were talking about the book, which I don't know if I thought it was that gross, but maybe because, I don't know.
Yeah, The Jungle was originally written as a way of exploring the Gilded Age and how workers' rights were being thrown out and how absolutely disgusting the process of industrialization was. And in describing how disgusting it was, he made people puke in the streets and they're like, we should probably make sure the food's clean. And everyone's like, you know? I was never really that concerned about the hot dogs. I was more concerned about the fingers.
Right.
Or like hecka clean. Yes.
I do that.
Post-depressive episode. Notice how that works. You're like, in this situation, if I'm depressed, I'm going to let my atmosphere, my environment reflect that depression. If I'm depressed, I'm fine just leaving that thing there. Screw it. I don't belong in a place that's clean. I don't belong in a place that is tidy. I don't have the means to do that. And then that creates a greater anxiety as well, because every morning you wake up and you're like, I have to clean up even more. I have to do even more to affect my environment.
And I think for me, maybe it's a little, I also aggressively paint or draw usually. But for me, I'm OCD, so I struggle with obsessing over things. So when I get to go clean, it gets to the point where I clean until like my fingers are raw, or I'll paint and then I'll like paint through the canvas, you know? So for me, it's kind of maybe taking a step away from those obsessive things, right? Like, Mr. Jackson has to keep reminding me not to overwater my houseplants because all I want to do is, because I'm here and I'm actually looking at them right now and my brain's like, oh, you should go water those. But I just water them and they don't need more love. But I want to. I want to control those things over there.
So when we're in the midst of a depressive episode, our environment reflects our depressive episode because it wants to maintain that sort of thing. When we're in the midst of an anxious episode, our environment will express that anxiety. You might tear things down. You might punch holes in walls. You might create more destruction in order to reflect the sense that you have inside of yourself. So when we're in those episodes, the best solutions that you have are reaching out to people who can help, reaching out to professionals. If you have access to your own prescribed medication, ensuring that you're on your medication, and then trying mindfulness exercises to get out of that exact moment, right? So if you're like, I'm super anxious and I can't fix it, walk outside. All right. I'm super depressed. I can't clean my room. Walk outside, right? Change of pace just in that exact moment. What we're talking about is what to do in the moment after. As Katie pointed out, the idea of I want to clean my room when I'm done with the depressive episode. Let's go one step beyond cleaning our room and say, can I create an environment that will ensure that next time I have a depressive episode, it's not as bad?
Yeah.
Can I create an environment where my anxiety doesn't lead me to break stuff, right?
Right. I think my routine is, I mean, if you're one of my students in my classroom that you might know that I do this, is I make a cup of tea. Like, I'll be like, all right, guys, work on your stuff for a minute. I'll be right back. I'll make a cup of tea and I'll have that. And that routine to me, like, triggers, like, safety, right? Like, I know I've got my nice warm cup of tea. I'm okay. And so that's, instead of walking outside, that's what I do, right? Or I'll cuddle with my dog. You know, I have those things that I know. And if I'm still have enough clarity to start those before they get worse. There's a lot in the chat that I...
And I'm just thinking of if you get super angry and you look up at the wall and you see a framed picture, and that framed picture, you think of it and you're like, oh, I just want to tear that thing down and I want to throw it against the wall, right? In that moment, step outside.
Yes.
Get away from the thing. Get away from the thing.
Safely.
In the next moment, when you're like, okay, I guess I'll clean up, or I guess I'll calm down, I'll take a breath, that next moment, your thought should be, and I should probably take that picture down.
Yeah.
Maybe I should replace it with a plastic frame.
Right.
Maybe I should put that in another place so that when I'm feeling that way, my environment doesn't release itself into that same spot. Maybe I need to replace that plastic framed picture with a guitar or with a canvas where I can put paint on the canvas or I can strum on the guitar. I can't tell you how many times I've picked up this exact guitar right over here and just treated it with so much disrespect because I was angry. And I sang songs that were just screaming or that I was upset, that sort of stuff, because I know that I can take my anger out on that guitar in ways that aren't going to break it, right? My anger manifests itself, my anxiety, my depression manifests itself in a healthy way through that. So I'm going to keep that nearby. I'm going to keep that easily accessible, right? Having a space that you know you can go to. I know of a friend of mine that would go into their closet and they would just spend time in their closet with the door shut. And they would be there. Maybe it's quiet. For me, I like to go into the bathroom and turn the light off and just lock the door and know that it's a safe space, right? Where there's nothing that's going to like make me really freak out. I can't go to my next favorite space, which is like the beach or some far away. Like I can't go to Disneyland. I can't go to Universal Studios. I can't go to my ideal place. So I'm going to find a place that isn't necessarily exactly the sweet spot, but at least it's not the thing that's not the environment that's like, ugh. So that's absolutely okay. I see a lot of people kind of resonating with this.
Yes. But there was something about self-diagnoses. And I want to make a comment about that because someone said something about women not being diagnosed specifically. Where did it go? A system that it takes years, if ever, to be appropriately diagnosed and lots of money. But there was something, where is that?
So I think of Trisha Paytas that just had a video about her having multiple personalities and how many people responded with like, shh. STFU. Like Trisha is so out of it and wrong and completely, it was bad. So I think of that in Katie's reference to some people will talk about it and make light of it and be like, you obviously don't have that thing, or they'll try and romanticize it, right? They're like, oh, I totally have this thing because they're seeking attention. Here's what my initial knee-jerk reaction to that is. If somebody's doing something because they're seeking attention, or I would say seeking connection, then you should connect with them, even if it is they're lying or manipulating. Some people might be in that place where they're lying and manipulating because they feel so discouraged by their true selves that they have to put on some sort of show.
Yeah.
You're not accepting their lies. You're not saying, yeah, okay, you definitely have that thing. We totally agree. But I'm saying, hey, I can tell you're going through something. Maybe it's not this thing that you think it is, but you're going through something. I can at least be a friend.
Right.
I can at least be somebody you can talk to.
Right. I think sometimes teachers get in this mindset like, oh, well, students are just doing it for attention. And I'm always like, well, then they probably need it. Right. Like if they're begging for attention in so many different ways, let's see if we can give them that attention. Right. If we are able and emotionally comfortable and have enough emotional space. Right. We don't give people attention when we don't have the emotional space. And I think from my own experience being a woman, it took me, how old am I? Last year, whoever had me in my class last year, I missed the first 2 weeks of school because I was in the emergency room. And I was finally, after 15 years, diagnosed with endometriosis. And it took 15 years. And this is constantly, luckily, right, my mom had a job in the school district, so I was able to have insurance. And I went to many, many doctors. I went to specialists. And everyone's like, oh, you're fine. And a lot of it was like, well, that's what it's like to be a woman. Endometriosis is my uterus. And it was, right, like cramping. They're like, oh, that's just what it's like. Get over it. Be tougher. Be stronger. And I was like, no, I'm pretty sure this isn't how my body is supposed to work. And so 15 years of begging and saying, no, please listen to me. And I'm a woman who had, luckily, had an education. I had an insurance. I had the ability and the time and the space to be able to go to a doctor. And I still couldn't get diagnosed properly. And so it's hard. It really is.
And I would say, let's imagine that everything about you is totally right. Like you're just living a completely healthy life. And in living your completely healthy life, you're like, isn't it weird that healthy people occasionally have these weird episodes where they lay in bed and they don't want to do anything and they feel really gross and then they like their whole lives start spiraling out of control and then like everything's terrible? That's a totally normal, healthy thing, right? Right? Like, so in that situation, you're at least still recognizing, like, if this is totally healthy, it's not the healthy I want. This isn't, like, the ideal situation. So in recognizing, like, hey, I'm not going to go out and say, I'm self-diagnosed with this thing. Like, I'm not going to go say, hey, everybody, I'm bipolar, when that has a whole lot of context to it and requires professionals that know how to diagnose those things. But I've even said stuff where I'm like, I definitely have aspects of ADD or ADHD, and I've never been diagnosed. And on top of that, I've had doctors in my high school career that were like, we don't really want to say that he is that. It seems like we don't know. And so the words that I've given to it is, I've got a case of the Jacksons. I got a case of the Jacksons. I don't know what it is. You can call it depression or you can call it not depression. I don't want to wake up today. I've got a case of the Jacksons. You can call it depression or not. I'm listening to nothing but sad music and that's it. Like, and I just don't, I've got weird vibes. So if you need to give it other language, then I completely understand if you feel like that protects people who are feeling this more. But I would say you are justified in saying, I'm struggling with this thing, even if somebody else is like, I'm more so struggling with that and I should get serious help. Okay. What does that? Yeah. If you're in a cancer ward and somebody has a worse cancer, you're not going to be like, well, I'll just peace out.
Right. I'll wait until it's my turn.
Let them get all the care. Let's just take care of the most extreme cases. You're still going to be like, guys, we all are in a very similar boat right now.
Blue, that closet comment was pretty funny. And the thing about wishing that you maybe had something to explain those feelings, right? You can still be depressed and not have depression. You can still feel anxiety and not have anxiety. And so I do know that thing where I was like in so much pain all the time that I thought, I really wish there was a reason for this, because then I wouldn't feel so weak, right? Like I felt weak and I felt like other women could handle it so well. And I was so impressed by all these women who were doing what I was doing and they weren't feeling, or they were like seemingly not feeling what I was feeling. A lot of women have endometriosis. So, but I remember thinking I need to be better because I don't have an excuse to, cry in bed all day because of my pain. Right. And that stinks. It's not a nice way to treat yourself.
Well, and it's a lie that you tell yourself in order to justify not coping with the reality of it. As Sammy pointed out, it took longer to accept that you were depressed than you were gay. Right. And I think that that's absolutely true. Like we all have things that we are dealing with that in trying to process them, I don't think anybody wants to be like, guys, I finally figured it out. I have a chronic illness, right? Like there's a hope inside of us that's like, maybe this is just normal and it goes away. There's actually a really good video, and I keep on going back to the Vlog Brothers because they're the better version of me. But there's a really good video by Hank Green where he talks about his chronic illness and how he struggled to accept it. And I think that that's a big thing, is that you've essentially, when you have a new normal, and maybe that new normal is we're all quarantined, or maybe that new normal is I have accepted the fact that I have anxiety or depression or major anxious disorder or major depressive disorder. You have a new normal. And so you have this new framework, right? On the far one side of it, you have the way you live your life when everything's good. And on the far other side of it, you have the way you live your life when everything's bad. A new normal, so acceptance of a diagnosis, means that whole thing has shifted to another place. I'll put that in frame. Shifted to another place, right? And so the natural process that you go through is to bounce back and forth between those things. Right? Whoa, whoa, whoa. And I'm bouncing back and forth in order to understand what my new context looks like. So I'm saying, maybe I have depression. Here's what I look like when I have depression to my maximum ability. Here's what I look like when I have depression to my worst ability. Maybe I'm in a situation where I'm quarantined. Here's what it looks like to have a good day in quarantine. Here's what it looks like to have a bad day in quarantine. So you're going to vacillate between those extremes far more frequently.
Right. We
when
fluctuate.
dealing with a new normal.
Yes. So Katie, I did not read that in the Discord. I'm sorry. Maybe I'll go through and see what everyone said.
Powerful, yeah. It's rough.
But
I'm feeling for you, Katie.
What I'm going to say is what I ended up having to do, right? I had lots of appointments, but every time I went in, they just kind of ignored me and they kind of didn't listen. And so I started making a journal. Like, when did it hurt? How long did it hurt? What was the scale 1 to 10 of the pain? And so then I went to the doctor and I said, okay, this is my book. These are the days that it hurt. These are the days it didn't. These are the days that it was like an 8. And these are the days that it was a 3, right? And these are days I couldn't eat because of it. And so I had all of this information. And I put it in front of the doctor and I said, this is happening. This is my schedule. And then they were like, oh, okay. They started to kind of listen to me more when I had evidence in front of them, because apparently me, telling them wasn't enough. Right. And so when you're finally lucky enough to get that appointment, go with information. Say, I can't, I have to,
make a book. Write down a journal that says all this stuff. And honestly,
or a calendar.
Do the thing that makes it possible for you to come in there with confidence. Because I don't know if necessarily throwing the book at them and saying, hey, look, I've got all this information. Maybe it's a video journal that you've done, whatever you're comfortable with, but where you're able to go in and be like, no, I'm not forgetful. I'm not just making this stuff up. On Tuesday of last week, here's a video of me sobbing.
Right.
And what I was sobbing about was something completely out of my control.
Yeah.
You're the doctor, fix it, right?
Yeah.
And coming in with that level of confidence within your own understanding, that's why I have trouble with this idea of like, well, I'm hesitant to self-diagnose. I don't want you guys to self-diagnose, but I do want you to explore yourself.
Yes.
And understanding that might require that you look into some of the things that other people are struggling with. Carefully, yeah. I watched a lot of videos about anxiety, and it took me a long time to understand that my anxiety manifests itself by distancing, right? Like, I don't know what is happening in the moment. I process what's happening a week later. And so I'll be sitting there in a quiet moment watching TV and just be like, oh my God, this thing happened last week. And talking to anybody who's close to me about that, they're like, that happened last week. Why are you freaking out about it? Or why would you just suddenly like storm off and freak out? And I'm like, I was processing this way after the fact. It's a common thing that happens with anxiety. I didn't know that was a common thing that happens with anxiety. I thought I had a case of the Jacksons. But having a case of the Jacksons means this thing. Deal with it, right? Like, I can't fix it. The doctors won't tell me what it is. So there's no pill. There's no magic thing. To wrap this up, because I do have to go pick up my kiddos. To wrap this up, I want to talk about, again, reminding you that your environment is one of the things that you have a lot of control over. Whether or not you stay in the exact spot that you're in is something where you do have autonomy. Whether or not your room remains clean is something that you have autonomy over. So the ability to say, I am going to do this and affect my environment is a great way to help with mental health. I'm going to change something about my environment. Maybe my room is very dark. I'm going to open the blinds. I'm just going to open the blinds today. Make it something so painfully easy that it's hard not to do it, right? If you come out of this conversation and you say, well, Missy, they told me I had to have a book. Mr. Jackson said do a video. And now Sammy's giving me an app and I just don't really know. Then, do we have to do daily picture?
Is that good? Oh, do I have to hold longer?
No.
Okay.
But if you come out of it with like, here's the prescriptions that were given to me by these two teachers on the internet, then
Yes.
you're missing it.
We're not professionals.
What I would say is you can affect your immediate environment. Do something as simple as possible to affect that, and you'd be surprised as to how that shifts your perspective of your reality in your life. Looking back all the way to what Gold had said, where listening to sad music feels so good when you're feeling sad, but it also encourages it. So how do I create an environment where I can enjoy that without getting lost in it or sucked into it, right? I would enjoy it with my friends. I would not enjoy it if I'm sitting at home. And if I'm sitting at home, locked in a dark room, and I take out my headphones and I plug in the saddest music I can think of, I know that I've hit a very rough place. But if I'm sitting with friends and I say, hey, I just heard this new song, it really is heartbreaking, I want to share it with you, I get the same experiences of like that first bit of sadness, but I'm not going to indulge in the whole thing, right? It's the difference between having a little slice of cake and sitting down with the whole cake in your bed and being like, F my life, right?
Is it Pixels? Is that the name of it?
Yeah.
That's interesting. I'm going to check it out. I don't know if I want an app. I'm going to look into it. One thing that happened that I needed very recently is I time my panic attacks, and that's something that works for me. And again, you don't have to do these. We're not professionals. We're just telling you trips. Yeah, words that work for us. My panic attacks, they don't typically last for more than 15 to 20 minutes. So timing it and knowing, okay, I only have 5 more minutes to feel this way. And it really like knowing that there's an end in sight. Cause I don't know about you, but when I'm having a panic attack, it feels like everything is falling around. Like it is too much, but knowing that there's the end in sight has really helped me. So whatever it is,
it took doctors like 10 years to diagnose what was wrong with me, some insisting that I was faking for attention. There's more.
I know, making me sad.
Let's just have an awkward moment while we wait for Sammy to type out the rest of that quote. Where did you go?
Mr. Jackson and I were talking the other day about how impressed we are with you guys because we see how you treat each other and how you talk to each other and have these advice for people. And the vent and helping section on the Discord is, I think, my favorite. And I think I'm impressed with you guys. And I'm ready and knowing that you guys are going to be okay because you reach out and you are good people.
Well, a furry artist I knew just went, that sounds like Crohn's, after hearing me complain once and ended up being right. Yep. What I would say is, if you're in a situation like Katie is describing, where maybe you know fully what is wrong, or you have a good grasp over what is wrong, you have words that help you understand it, but you are not getting the help that you need, recognize that you do have tools in your toolbox right now at home. You have abilities, you have things that you can do right now that will make it a little bit better. There's not a magic cure. There's nothing in your house. And if you think there's something in your house that might be a magic cure, you should probably get rid of it, right? If there's something where like, even something as silly as, well, I don't have anxiety when I play Animal Crossing, so I'm just going to play Animal Crossing. That's not a cure. That might be something that helps, but it is not a cure to the problem. And if you're viewing it as a cure to the problem, then it's probably something you need to have a little distance from.
Yeah.
You do have the ability to impact your environment, to make things a little bit brighter, to have a little bit of control, even if it's something as simple as cleaning your sheets, something as simple as opening the blinds, closing the laptop for a little bit, taking a little bit of time to just know I can clean this spot, I can fix things. That's going to be huge.
Yeah.
That's going to be huge. So little steps, whatever you can do to change your environment, going all the way back to what we said with Malcolm Gladwell, right? You are not a criminal. You're not a broken person. You might be in a bad context. All right. So
Escapes aren't cures. I'm just reading out loud.
yeah.
Oh, also,
I'll become a spider.
sometimes it's 3 steps forward and 5 steps back. You're human. You're allowed to make mistakes. Not a single person among us has not ever made a mistake. So be nice to yourself.
And last but not least, if a teacher is giving you homework assignments, you tell them no.
Yes.
That is not how this works right now.
Yep.
You can just ignore that email and be like, sorry, I didn't have access to the internet while I was at home.
And we didn't tell you this. Yeah, actually, we did. I'm proud we're telling them this.
Thanks,
So,
Gold. You're
yeah.
amazing. You have a great peanut butter hour as well. I'm going to eat more candy because I can. I'm a grown-up and I decide what that means. All right? Stomp your feet, clap your lap, da-da-da-da, yell quack.
Quack. Bye. Love you guys.
You're amazing.